Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin T. Mish.
Good morning and welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the host, Darrin T. Mish, the IRS Solution Attorney.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Welcome to the show and good morning.
Good morning.
So how's it going, Darrin?
It's going wonderfully. I'm really excited about today's topic. It's an interesting topic. We're not going to be so tax heavy today.
I would say not. I would say not. But it's a fun topic nonetheless. You and I were talking about this before the show, and I could talk about this stuff all day long.
You know, it's near and dear to my heart, actually, because it's the topic of today's show is 11 ways to stay motivated when you're getting out of debt.
Now, why do you say that?
Just like everyone else, you know, I found myself in debt at various times in my life, and it can be demoralizing. You know, it's like sometimes it just feels debilitating. You're like, well, all I can do is afford to pay the minimum payments on my credit cards, and why bother? And it has a tendency to cause you not to really focus on what you're trying to get out of life, you know, because you just feel like you're toiling away to pay the interest on your credit card payments and whatnot. And it's just near and dear to my heart because if you think about what I do in helping people who have tax problems, I help them get out of debt. Yeah. And that's what I do all day, every day.
It's just the debt to the big, hairy, scary monster called the IRS.
Yeah, the scariest monster, right? But and that's why it's near and dear to my heart. I've done it myself. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm completely out of debt, but you know, I'm in a good place, and by focusing, and I'll share some of the details of how I did it myself. In focusing and just deciding to make it happen, I was able to make some of my bigger dreams in life come true. And so I think that's important for people. I think
it's a good comparison and contrast, especially since we're the same, you know, station that Dave Ramsey airs on. I think it's neat to point out some of those differences. Are you familiar with FPU and the debt snowball and how he teaches it?
Not super.
So I am. We host it in our office. So I'll talk about some comparisons as we go along, and we'll both share because I too have been in that position where I've been in debt and couldn't make my payments, which I think is why I'm so ultra conservative. But we were talking about this, and there is that fine line and that balance. You know, I drive a lot, right? I live in the car. I probably am in my car more than I'm in my house. It's just the nature of the beast with my job, but. I had a 10-year-old car, you know, we have several cars, so we put a lot of miles on them. But at some point, you know, you have to go, yeah, this is not making sense anymore. And we took it to the dealer because it was making some crazy noise. Thought we already had it fixed. And the short of it was going to be probably at least $3,000 just to open it up and get in there. I'm like, not on this car. It's too old.
Right. I mean, there does, especially if vehicles, there becomes a point of diminishing returns where it's like it's going to cost more to keep this jalopy on the road than it is to, buy a new car. I had a 1969 Volkswagen camper bus back in the 80s, and I lived in Southern California and surfed and did all that stuff, and it was a really cool vehicle. And it was paid for. But at some point in time, it became so expensive just to keep it rolling. I wish I had that car still. You know, it'd just be really cool to have now at this point in my life.
And you're chasing good money after bad. You know, at some point it doesn't make sense. But to the whole point being, you know, if you buy, and here's the thing, like Dave Ramsey preaches, don't buy a new car ever. Like always let somebody else take that new car depreciation, buy it a couple of years old, and basically let someone else take that hit, right? Because it's not an asset. It's never going to appreciate. It's always going to depreciate to the point to where at some point it's not really worth anything. Except, you know, for the rare exception of classic cars. But even then pretty much it's more of a liability than an asset. And when you look at the difference, if you buy, like I told you, we were looking at it was like a 3 or 4 year old car. But when you look at the rate that the bank wants to charge you for a used car, even with perfect credit, you're in the low 3s, 4s, which is good now by today's standards. Or you can finance a brand new car, you know, get a fantastic deal, get a trade in that you couldn't get anywhere else from the dealer, I thought. And, you know, for me, it made sense at the end of the day. It was less than $100 difference, 0% interest. Why would I write a check when I can borrow Toyota's money for free?
Sure. That makes, perfect sense. Well, today's show is 11 ways to stay motivated when you're getting out of debt. And it's based roughly on an article that I found on a really smart guy's website. His name is Scott Alan Turner. He does the Scott Alan Turner Show. and his website is scottallenturner.com. Scott's a self-made millionaire and got out of debt. Well, basically, he's a self-made millionaire who teaches his site readers and shows listeners to become financial rock stars and get out of debt faster, save more money, and retire rich. So it's a little bit different potentially than Dave Ramsey, who we were just talking about. But when I read this article, I was really struck by how much it resonated with me, and I thought that our listeners would benefit from it as well.
Definitely. I mean, I like that idea because you and I were talking about this before the show, and I think there's a fine line between being so frugal you don't spend any of your money while you're here on this planet, and, so what? You leave a big pile of cash. Like, what's that going to do? Like, you have to live while you're here. So there's a fine line between eating dog food when you're retired, you know what I mean, and living for the moment.
Yeah. So I'm a proponent of you need to enjoy life while you're here. That doesn't mean that every, expense needs to be extravagant and you don't need to drive a Rolls Royce and, have a private jet.
You still need to save for a rainy day.
Although, if you want those things, I think that you should have them if you can afford them. If you can figure out how to afford them, for sure. And I do have some friends that do those things, and I think that's really pretty neat.
I just looked at a property yesterday in a pilot community. So literally, like, a lot of people have the Cessnas right there at their house.
Yeah, that's neat. That's for sure neat.
Love those properties. I'll tell you about that when it
So in Scott Allen Turner's article, the first thing he said was, you need to get mad. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. Because I think it's like with anything in life, you're not going to make a big change until you hit that tipping point, and to where you get to the point that you're so mad that you just paid X amount in interest. I mean, I don't carry any credit card debt, so I don't know, but I imagine the rates are probably 20-25%. That's what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing. Is that right?
Well,
some of them are lower, maybe.
I do have some credit card debt, especially on the business side. And it's stabilized, anywhere from about 8% to about 15%. But there were some times when I had some in the 29-30% range.
See, that makes me want to throw up. I can't do that.
I mean, that's a lot of money, especially if you're looking at a strong 5-figure balance, But, going back to the point of you got to get mad. I've gotten mad financially twice in my life. One time was when I had a bunch of student loans, and I was looking at them. And I could see how much interest was going out for the student loans. And so I literally put those student loans in a spreadsheet, and I just started, and they all had student loans were kind of different than credit cards. Mm-hmm. They all had different rates. Okay. And so what I did is I put them all in a spreadsheet, and I just started savagely attacking the ones with the highest rates, and I paid those off first. I think that's a little bit like what Dave Ramsey teaches.
Actually, it's a little bit opposite because, he teaches knock out your smallest to largest balance regardless of interest rate. And in some instances, that makes sense, but I think the point he's trying to get at is it's a debt snowball.
Yeah, he's trying to get you some momentum and some velocity. Whereas I just looked at the pure math, and because I'm kind of a little bit of a math guy,
yes,
a tax attorney.
I look at the numbers too.
And I looked at the math, and I'm like, well, we got to get rid of these high interest rate ones. These things are killing me. And then once you get used to that new higher payment that you've self-imposed, then you can just keep that going.
Exactly.
Your snowball there.
Same thing.
And you just start attacking the more shallow or the lower interest rate ones. And a second time I got mad was, I went through kind of a tough time business-wise and personal-wise with finances. And I had a lot of credit card debt. And I was feeling kind of hopeless, and like I alluded to a minute ago, and I was feeling really demotivated. And I talked to a coach, and the coach was like, you can take care of that. You just have to devise a plan. And that kind of snapped me out of that stupor. And what I did is I put all the credit card debts in a spreadsheet. Actually, I got this really simple software program for free or $5 or something, and I just put all the debts in there, put all the balances in there, all the interest rates, all the minimum payments, and then I just devised a plan to get them paid off faster.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think happens to people is if you have multiple credit cards, let's say you have 5 or even 10 credit cards, and you're just making the minimum payments, it just gets lost on you, like what you're even trying to accomplish here. You're just trying to keep your head above water. And I would suggest that most people can do a little bit better than just the minimum payment, one way or the other.
Well, like you said, when you get mad, you combine that to, hey, I'm paying attention to this, and I'm going to get laser focused on this, to just determination. Like, I'm going to get rid of this. I'm sick of it. I'm wiping it out. But like for me, like just even talking about like 8%, which I think was the lowest one that you mentioned. When I look at that, I'm just like, okay, I want to be the guy that lends, or the girl that lends money and gets that 8% return. Like that's how my mind thinks.
Yeah, for sure. And the banks love folks who just make the minimum payments. I mean, because that's a cash cow. And all that interest is what keeps the banks, going.
And it's in, to the point to this, you're either going to get so mad that you do something about it, or you get sick to your stomach and you bury your head in the sand, which is what a lot of your folks do when they come in with these big tax debts.
Oh yeah. It's possible to bury your head in the sand for years before you kind of realize what you're doing here. And I've met people who've never gotten their heads out of the sand. They just stay there. They die.
I think you got to do something. Like if it's so overwhelming that you can't do it and you really are that financial upside down, talk to an attorney. Maybe your best resolution is bankruptcy. It's not forever. It wipes off after 10 years. You can rebuild after a BK.
And most people's credit, if they do the right things, they can have credit in 2 years. They can get a mortgage.
Let me tell you something. We have seen people literally with high 600s 2 years after bankruptcy. And I look at this and I go, I don't even know how that's possible.
And we're not talking about bankruptcy really here in the show today, but I've seen many people over the years where I look at their situation and it's like obvious. Okay, that's the clear answer. Bankruptcy's the answer. We need to wipe this out. We need a clean slate, start over. Yeah. It's not something to be ashamed of. It just isn't. If the government passed the law and put it there for a reason, you can get yourself so buried that there is no way to pay your way.
Let's face it, it's how our economic system works. So
if banks are going to make credit easy, then they're going to have to go through some bankruptcies,
Well, it's about that time we have to take a real quick break here at the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We'll be back here in just a minute. Welcome back
to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks for sticking with us through the break while we talk about 11 ways to stay motivated when you're getting out of bed.
And so the first way we talked about was just get mad. Get old-fashioned, get mad, do something about it. Yeah. Use your anger to motivate yourself to devise a plan and figure out a way to pay a little bit more to get yourself out of debt.
Take the sugar tree, stir the pot, kick the hornet's nest. Do something to create that momentum and that energy.
The second thing that Scott Allen Turner talks about in his article is, just focus on how your life will change.
There's a lot to be said for that one.
Yeah, for sure. And so in my story, when I was getting out of that credit card debt, it really did feel like this was never going to end. We were never going to get another house. It just wasn't going to happen. My credit was still okay, but I just really mired under a ton of debt. And once I made a plan, it went pretty fast. I would say within 6 to 12 months, I had things really much better. And one of the things that I did was to focus on how my life will change. And one of the things that we talk about on the show all the time, the farm and the chickens and all that stuff. One of the things I did was I just focused on how I wanted our life as a family to change. I wanted that property. I wanted to raise my kids in that atmosphere, a little bit safer. They can ride on our property. They can ride their bikes and stuff. And someday they can ride their horses and stuff. And you don't have to worry about strangers or anything like that. If there's a stranger on our property, we've got a bigger
They're not
problem.
Supposed to be there.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because there's a lot to be said for that, Darrin, and even like myself, and my approach is so different to real estate. A lot of people, they say, hey, I want to list my house. They go, great. And they show up with a listing contract. They sign it as fast as they can. They stick a lockbox on the door, a sign in the front yard, and pray that someone else is going to sell it. And that's most agents' marketing plan.
For sure.
For me, I really start with the core reason of why I'm there. And I won't even take a listing unless I can dive deeper into, hey, what's going on? Why am I here? And really try to help them understand where they're going and get that laser focus on, and it's always something, right? There's a death, there's a divorce, there's, they're outgrown, a new baby. There's some change that makes people want to move, right? So for you, what was that change the last time you moved?
The real big thing was we wanted the bigger house and we wanted some property. It really went back to some hogs, believe it or not. It went back to some pigs.
So if we started there, for example, and this is again talking about that focus, but I would say, well, what's important to you about raising hogs and pigs on your property?
Short story. The first year the kids did 4-H raising their hog project, they did it at the school, and there was some conflict and whatnot with other people at the school. And so that was a really negative sort of experience. And so that got me kind of mad. I was kind of mad about the conflict.
Go back to number one.
And then I got mad and I was like, well, I'll just buy a place for some stinking hogs. And the first idea was I'll just buy an acre someplace and we can put a hog pen on it. Right. Well, that wasn't real practical. And so it took me 2 years from the day I got mad about the hogs before we actually moved into our new place. It was 10 times larger than we were actually thinking. But, that was our motivation.
That's how it starts.
And I'm kind of teasing that it was all about the hogs, but the hogs were like a symbol of a bigger,
that's what
a bigger
sparked
goal.
the change. That's where it started.
Yeah. It was like, I need to get motivated. We don't need to be doing this at the school. This is not working out for us. And so that's what we did.
And that's where, again, that focus really, if you can drill down, like even if you don't work with somebody like me, but you can ask yourself, look, what's important about being out of debt? And what would you do if you were out of debt?
I've been asking more and more people when they come in for initial consultations with me, well, tell me what your motivation is. Why, this has been going on for 12 years. Why are we sitting here now? And some people think it's a really odd question. And a lot of people just say, well, because I'm tired of it. It's been going on too long. Or they say, because I want to buy a house in 2 years, or whatever the answer is. And frankly, the people who have the stronger whys are better clients.
They get through it. Yep. I always ask them, what's driving this choice right now? Why is now the right time to do this?
Right. I'm sure sometimes people say, well, I think the market's going to do this or that.
There's always a deeper why. They might say that, but by the time we drill all the way down, there is always a much bigger why at the end of it.
And I bet you that helps you find them the ideal house, the house that they're really looking for.
It absolutely does, because we know exactly what they're looking for. And they think, oh, I want this. But then really when you hone in on exactly what this is, it might be a little different than what they thought they wanted.
So Scott Allen Turner, in the article that's the basis of this show today, talked about a writing exercise, and I wanted to share it with you. What he says is, he says, write down 10 ways your life will change when you're out of debt. I think that's pretty powerful. And some of the suggestions were, will you be able to work at a job you love? For example, you might be in debt and you have this job you hate, and you're only at that job because you need the money because you're in debt.
Yes.
I know lots of lawyers are in that situation for sure. He says, will you be able to pack up and go where you want to? That's, pretty interesting too. If it were up to me, I'd spend several months a year in the Florida Keys, but it's not really practical given my profession and whatnot.
Well, and it boils down to the freedom of choice. Right?
Oh, for sure.
Like if you don't have debt or things that are following you around, you've got a lot more options and choice.
Oh, that's for
sure. You
sure.
don't have to show up at your 9-to-5 job to pay.
Just like if you have cash, you have all the options in the world, right? If you're buying a house, for example, going back to your profession, if you have cash, you've got a lot more options than if you have to.
That's right.
Than if you're just pre-qualified.
And there's people that, they could have just had a bankruptcy, but if they've got cash, they can buy a house.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
One day at a bankruptcy program. If they've got a significant down payment, 20%, 30%, they can buy a house. One day out of bankruptcy.
One of the other questions was, will you be able to work less? That could be a real motivator to people, especially in my profession, right? You've got lawyers that are working 60, 80 hours a week, and they're just doing that because they're in debt and because they had to have all the fancy stuff. They have to have the 2 Mercedes and, $200 haircuts.
And doctors are also very guilty of this.
Oh yeah.
They are the high income earners that have the most amount of debt between student loan debts and other debts, and they fall into this trap that they can never get out of.
Yeah, I represent lots of doctors and have over my career, and that's very true. He says, do you just want a good night's sleep without stress and worry?
I can imagine you've ever heard this from any of your clients.
Yeah, getting out of debt can do that for you. It can help you sleep, because a lot of people spend a significant portion of every night up worrying. My YouTube views, on my YouTube channel, which is the IRS Solution Attorney, by the way.
The hits go up at 2 a.m. in the morning?
They do. All night. That's when all the viewing happens, is in the middle of the night, because people are freaked out and worried.
But you know what? Going back to that, Darrin, and thinking about what we said at the earlier part of the show, there was a time when Chris and I had a significant amount of debt as well. And looking at that, I remember that very clearly. I remember not being able to sleep at night. It was about the time period that I had that little pickle with the IRS. Mm-hmm. And it's like everything at once.
I've said this a lot on the show, and I just said this to somebody the other day that was really going through a health issue. But I really believe that what I'm about to say is very true. And that is that every challenge that we go through in life, there lies an opportunity hidden therein.
Yes.
And we need to, when we're going through these tough times, when we're going through these challenges and everything seems like it's bad, sometimes it just feels like there's no light in the world and everything's going wrong. Your job as the person going through the challenge is to look for the opportunity, look for the lesson.
Yes.
You can look at it as God or the universe. I don't care how you look at it, but there's some higher power that's putting you through this challenge so that you can grow. If you don't grow your way out of that challenge, you've lost.
So, going back to that same scenario, Darrin, I truly believe that with all of my being as well. And even though it was the worst possible time I thought ever in my life, looking back, you know what my takeaway, my lesson was from that? I started my own business at 23. I opened up as a correspondent lender. Okay.
Wow.
And what I learned from that whole experience is A, pick your partners wisely. And B, an even better point is, you know, not all tax people are created equal, right? So like
true.
and the part of the reason why we got in that mess is we had horrible tax advice starting up that business. And so looking at that in hindsight, you know, my takeaway was pay attention to the numbers, you know what you're looking at, because you can get bad tax advice. I mean, we set up a brand new corporation as a C corporation.
Oh, wow.
Who does that? Like, you know, looking back now and from your profession, you're like, yeah, that was dumb. I didn't know. I was 23.
In your situation, it was really dumb. In some people's situation, it could be brilliant.
Right,
but in that situation, it was horrible
dumb,
advice for sure.
Yeah.
For
So, but I learned about that. I learned, you know, the difference in between an S corporation and a C corporation. You know, you get very familiar with those things, and you know what's the best thing, and you learn to ask better questions.
Yeah, we're a little bit off track here, but not all professionals are created equal. That's for sure.
Without a doubt.
You know, if you're in the hospital and you've just gotten a bad diagnosis, you might want to get a second, third, fourth opinion. You know, you might want to go to a specialist. You might want to go to one of the most renowned specialists in the world or country if you can afford it. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day that has a pretty rare condition medically, and they were talking about going up to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And I thought about it. I'm like, well, yeah, Minnesota's like a 2-hour plane ride. Like, who cares? That's nothing. If you're talking about your life here,
in the grand scheme of things,
you're talking about
nothing.
the quality of your life, it's really nothing. But you're right. I think especially younger people are kind of preconditioned to, what's the word I'm thinking of? Just kind of go along with authority. And so when you were 23 and you got that bad tax advice, I mean, you just kind of went along with it because you didn't know any better. And you kind of thinking, well, this person must know. They know more than I do. Turns out, barely.
No, it did not. We have to take a quick break already. We didn't even finish this, but when we come back from the IRS Solution Attorney show, we are going to jump back into the rest of this topic, which is focusing on how your life will change and 11 ways to stay motivated when you're getting out of debt. We'll be back in just a minute.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about 11 ways to stay motivated when you're getting out of debt. We got a little bit chatty, Darrin, in the first couple segments. We got to kind of get through this because we do have some good information that we want to share and finish up with. There's a couple more points that we really should share, Darrin, on the second thought, which is focusing on how your life will change. I know we said write down 10 things and 10 ways in which your life will change if you're out of debt. But there was the counterbalance to that.
Now write down 10 ways your life will look if you don't change.
Exactly.
And then keep that list handy. I would say keep both lists handy. The do change and don't change. Keep that list handy. Write it down. Do not put it on. Don't text it into your machine so that it's computer. No, write it down on a piece of paper and then put that piece of paper on a sticky note or something so that you see it repeatedly, and what will happen is amazing.
And even better, there's a super high percentage of people that are visual. Write some pictures that go along with that. Get some pictures of what goes with the mess if you don't get out of debt, and get some pictures of what it looks like if you do. And I guarantee you, your life will start to shift.
It'd be like the difference between a Toyota Corolla and a Lexus. I mean, just to be modest, right?
They're both made by Toyota.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Okay.
Right. No, but one's not clearly as nice as the other.
Without a doubt. So the third point is stay laser focused. And I think I jumped ahead when I said that, but indeed.
Well, if you keep that list, it's going to help you stay laser focused. It's not really that hard. We're talking about 1% change here, folks. I mean, if you just change 1% a day in the course of a year, you're going to have almost 365% change. So that's what we're talking about. Just get a little bit better every day. Make smarter choices. I would say if you're going to Starbucks, and I don't even know because I don't drink coffee, but what's a coffee at Starbucks? $7-8?
$5-ish or up.
Okay, so
if you're lucky,
unless
you get one for $3.
A triple mocha latte frappuccino thingy. But
yeah, he drinks Diet Coke. He's got that one nailed.
You might consider, bringing your own coffee. Making your own coffee is a whole lot cheaper.
Oh yeah, but stay focused, chisel away, do one activity per day that drives you towards your goal. So it's not entirely in that point, but would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. And ask yourself daily, what's my life going to look like when I get out of debt? When you start daydreaming of the peace, the freedom, the life you deserve to be living, you'll get a little bump, a little positive bump to make it through the day. I mean, if you're in a lot of debt, this is a challenge that's been put before you so that you can grow and learn.
And I promise there is a lesson. You might not know it right then, but there is a lesson.
Without a doubt. There is definitely a lesson.
So number 3 on our list is review your goals every single day.
Yeah, if your goal is to get out of debt, then you need to write it down. I mean, we've already hit upon this a couple times now in the last couple of minutes. You have to have that written goal written down someplace so that you see it and you see it repeatedly. And just the power of human psychology means that you'll eventually work towards that goal. A couple times in my life, I've written down big, hairy, audacious goals for myself. And usually I write it down about 10 of them, big life goals, like a new house, that kind of goal. And I've written those down, and then I haven't even followed this advice. I don't look at them routinely. I just write them down. Actually, I wrote them down and put it like on my keyboard tray at the office, but the keyboard was on top of it, right? Couple years,
it's still there.
It's still there. And a couple of years later, I went back and I looked at the goals and I laughed because I had accomplished all 10 of the goals, and some of them I absolutely smashed.
But you didn't even think about it. Can you imagine what happened if you looked at it every single
right,
day?
And you were fired up. And so when I was in debt, most recently, I've looked at those spreadsheets every single day. And on some days, I looked at them multiple times a day because I wanted to stay fired up. I wanted to stay mad. I wanted to stay laser focused
in that zone
so that I could get it knocked out. And we did.
It's proven that, people that write down their goals are substantially higher, chance of actually achieving those goals.
Absolutely. And there was a Harvard MBA study that tracked students who had set clear written goals. The 3% of students who had written goals were earning on average 10 times as much as the other 97% of the class combined.
Yeah, I don't doubt it at all. I'm surprised that number is not higher. That's one study. I bet you get another one that number is even higher.
That's amazing. Yeah. So folks, if you're trying to get out of debt, you have got to write your goals down.
So the 5th point here in our 11 ways to stay motivated when you're getting out of debt is to keep on learning.
There's an abundance of financial blogs and articles you can learn from, and they all have tips and tricks to saving more and spending less. The more you know, the more you'll save, and the faster you'll get out of debt. The better you learn how to control your money, the less likely your money is going to control you.
And this is to Dave Ramsey's point exactly, because they teach the zero-based budget model, which is tell every dollar where it's going to go before you even receive it. So it's right on point. And number 6 is do a little bit every day, just a little.
So there's that old saying, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're talking about. If you have a mountain of debt, you've got an elephant. I mean, that's the bottom line. You gotta eat it in small bites if you have to. But you can get out of that debt if you just take a little bit of action every day. Again, like I said, if you were just improved 1% a day, eventually it would be monumental.
So the next one I have to laugh, but number 7 on our list is find some support. And it's funny, that I sell real estate, right? Like that's my trade by choice. And I've actually got referred by other people because I've helped them, put together a debt snowball or help them figure out how to get out of debt, help them find that focus. I've been referred to people to help them do the same thing. And then they think I'm a financial advisor. I'm like, no. I can help you, but I'm not a financial advisor. But number 7 is find some support.
Yeah, it might be that your friends and family aren't really all that excited about you getting out of debt, and when you try to get out of debt, those closest to you may react negatively. Now, my comment about this is that, well, gee.
You might be the one buying all the stuff.
Well, that wasn't what I was going to say. But if you have friends, like friends are friends by choice,
yes.
Right? So if you have friends that are not excited for you and the goals that you have in life, you need to get some better friends.
Well, there's a book I know that referenced it specifically, but they said the 5 or 10 people that you hang out with the most are the ones you're more likely to become. Like that's your inner circle. So if your friends are hanging out doing bad illegal stuff all day, then that's your circle of friends.
Or even just bad lazy stuff all day.
Yeah.
If they're not happy for you that you've decided to open a business or go back to school or get out of debt or anything positive or that you find to be positive, then I think you just need to get better friends. And it's really not that hard. And it can be, it can be kind of tough to think about getting new friends, but you just need to associate with a group of folks that are more focused on what you're trying to get out of life. And I'm still friends with my buddies, some of my buddies from way back in the day.
And you can be, but they don't have to be in your inner circle of friends.
Yeah, they don't need to be telling me, that, hey, you're thinking too big here. I actually had one buddy who laughed, who really did, and straight out laughed at me when I was in college and said I was going to law school. And he laughed and said, he pulled out a phone book and he showed me, this is the thickest part of the phone book was the attorneys. And I said, well, that's okay, because I'm going to be one of the best. That was my thought process all along. And I had an opportunity later to kind of reconnect with him, and he had to begrudgingly admit that I had done okay.
That's funny. I love it. But, you change that circle of friends. He lives in California, doesn't he? Did you leave him behind? I knew it. But, stay encouraged. Find some Facebook groups, some personal finance blogs, Twitter chat. Like, stay in that little inner circle to keep you focused on where you're trying to go.
Yeah, going back to social media real quick. I have a philosophy that I try not to post anything negative on social media and the reason is I don't want negativity in my life. Right. And so the last thing that I need to be doing is emitting negativity. Now, that doesn't mean that I always feel positive. By no means. Even many times coming here to do the show, I'm not feeling super positive after having been in traffic for 2 hours.
But when he gets here, he's lovely.
But, you have to, sometimes you have to fake it till you make it, right? So you've just got to adjust your attitude so that it's positive, because when you do that, when you're faking that positivity has a way of coming back to you magnetically. I think it's some kind of magical universe thing. Yeah,
absolutely. If you remember a while back, I did that 100 days of gratitude for the social media. If you remember, started on day 1, and every single day I posted something I was grateful for, and I tried not to duplicate anything. It might sound crazy, but it was hard. So take the 100 days of gratitude challenge. If you're not on social media, text it to a buddy or a friend.
Yeah. Just put
something you're grateful for every day.
Put a note on your desk so that when people walk by, when coworkers walk by, they go, hey, what's that?
You have 100 sticky notes on your wall.
Yeah. That's pretty neat. I think it might be a little bit challenging to do 100 things you were grateful for, but probably not. Right? I mean, when you really thought about it, it doesn't have to be a huge thing.
All right, I'm going to challenge you to do it. Do your 100 days of gratitude.
You can challenge all you want. I'm not sure I'm going to do it. But
What? What are you talking about? We're talking about this whole positive show, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to do it. I'm throwing you under the bus. Come on, Darrin.
Yeah, you sure are.
100 days of gratitude. Maybe you can get your kids to do it with you. It's summertime.
So another thing would be to find an accountability partner. And some people might not be familiar with what that term means, but find one of those positive people, the people that are supportive of you and your goals and your life, and that's supportive of you getting out of debt, and just report back to them. I'm in coaching groups and mastermind groups and things like that. And I've been in a lot of mastermind groups, and the ones that I like the most they're actually the hardest, because they have an accountability component. Yep. And if you don't show up and do the things that you basically had promised that you would do, then everybody ridicules you, makes fun of you, and gives you a hard time. And I love that. In
my groups, I make you write a check.
Yeah.
To your competition.
Oh. Have you ever had to do that?
No, I'm not doing it.
How big a check?
It depends on the size of, the group. Some of these guys are heavy players, some of them not. But I personally pay for coaching as well. And it's probably way more than most people would. And, it's questionable. But the whole idea is to help you get to the next level and have somebody hold you accountable. For what I'm paying that coach, they better hold me accountable if I'm not hitting those numbers.
Yeah, for sure. So you need an accountability partner. You may not have anybody in your personal life that can actually serve as your accountability partner, and you might have to go online and go to a Facebook group or whatever to get that done. The next one, real quick before the break, is stay patient. It took you years to accumulate the debt, and it might take you years to get rid of it. The other thing, though, to think about is as you're shedding the debt, almost by definition, right, your interest will go down and you'll make more headway and you'll have that snowball that we were talking about.
I tell people you didn't get in that mess overnight. You're not going to get out of it overnight.
So if you need to ask yourself a question. Are you doing everything you can do to further your goal of getting out of debt? If the answer is yes, then just calm down, relax.
Yeah, just do what you can do.
Awesome. You got a plan. That's one of the problems that people have with IRS problems is they have a big problem and they don't even know, and this is not their fault, but they don't even know how to formulate the bases of a plan.
And so the last one on our list, real quick, is record your progress.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you don't
I skipped in.
You did?
I skipped in. Wait, okay, go. Wait, go back.
Okay, so you got to reward yourself and have some fun, but make it reasonable. So, again, we talked about that in the first segment of the show. It can't all be, Spartan living,
ground pound,
wearing loincloths and living in a grass hut. I mean, you can't do that. You got to have some rewards. So if you like eating out, go eat out once a month, but don't go to, the high-end steakhouse. Go to someplace more reasonably priced. We went to Chili's the other day, and for $10, you got a great meal.
Yeah. Exactly. The last one is record your progress.
Absolutely. If you don't record your progress, then it's not going to feel like you're making any progress. So there's that saying that says what gets recorded is improved.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, when I was looking at my spreadsheet, and I still look at those spreadsheets, by the way, but when you look at those spreadsheets, you get motivated and you can see the progress. The little software that I use is cool because it tells you where you started out.
Yeah. And you can kind of say, oh, look where I came from.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, wow,
and have your emergency fund in line. You know, Dave teaches 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. If you're self-employed, 6 months, or a job that's volatile, absolutely you should have 6 months.
You know, we talked an awful lot about Dave Ramsey today, but Scott Allen Turner at scottallenturner.com was the basis of this show and the things that we were talking about today. And I would encourage you to go check him out. He's not quite as well known as Dave Ramsey, but check him out. He's got a slightly different philosophy. I think more in line with how I believe, and maybe even Katrina believes.
Yeah, you got to have to have that balance, you know. But Dave teaches put 20% down every single time and don't take a 30-year no. I get people from his network. Is that always a plan? No, it's not always their best plan.
Right, it's not the best plan for everyone anyway. So, and there's times when you want to reach. You know, actually, we bought the house that we bought because I needed stretch. I need to stretch so I can stay motivated so that I can help more people.
Right. Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We got to take a great break. We'll be back in just a minute to wrap up the show.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Mabel. Thanks for sticking with us through the break. And if you're just now joining us, this is 11 ways to stay motivated when you're getting out of debt. We pretty much wrapped up the show here a little bit earlier, and some really good points. The whole thing's available on a podcast if you want to catch it there.
Yeah, check out the podcast at the IRS Solution Attorney Podcast. You can also download our app at the App Store and the Google, whatever the Google Store is called. It's also called the IRS
Play
Solution
Store.
Attorney. It's called the Play Store
for you.
I'm not sure many people are going to my app to play anything other than play the game of how to get out of your tax debt.
We rarely get to our questions during the show. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
And we actually have a little bit of time to get to one of our questions that we had today. So one of the ones we got from Shane, he wants to know, how do I know if I have to file quarterly individual estimated tax payments?
Okay, so there's a textbook answer here, and the textbook answer is if you expect to owe at least $1,000 in tax for the current tax year after subtracting your withholding and your refundable credits, then you're supposed to make an estimated tax payment. The other thing is you only have to pay 90% of the prior year's tax liability to be considered current with your estimated tax payment. So let me give you an example. If last year you owed exactly $10,000, then you only have to pay 90% of $10,000, which is $9,000 in order to be considered current for estimated tax purposes, meaning that you won't get the estimated tax payment penalty. Now, the funny thing is that this is one penalty that I've always thought should be a little bit higher, honestly, because the ES...
Higher than 90%?
No, the ES penalty is super low.
Oh, okay.
You know, I pay one every year because I don't get it exactly right. And it's like $200 or something. You know, it's really, really small. And because it's so small. Why do you think it should be higher? Because I think if it was a little bit higher, it would encourage more compliance, honestly.
Okay.
And this is one area of the law where I think that people could use some encouragement. They could be a little bit more interested because really, we talk about this on the show all the time. The payment of estimated tax payments is your ticket to like freedom. You know, it's just that having that discipline to get some money paid in so that you don't get to April 15th and you've got this giant tax bill and you don't know how to do it.
Well, we talk about paying it quarterly, and I know that was Shane's question, but I make tax payments monthly when I pay myself. And if I got paid weekly, I would do it weekly. And if I got paid bi-weekly, I would do it bi-weekly.
Yeah, I encourage lots of people to do them monthly. And then there are some people where I have to ask them to do it weekly because they just can't get their head wrapped around, the bigger number.
Well, I think if you're self-employed, just do it when you get paid.
Yeah, that's easy. It's a little bit oversimplistic. I mean, you pay yourself a salary. I know that because we've talked about it so much, but most real estate agents kind of live from closing to closing. And so, yeah, I would say when they get that closing, that's when they should make their estimated tax payment. So it's not necessarily monthly. Some agents don't close a house a month. Some close 5 houses a month or 20 houses a month. I don't know. But
most agents close 5 houses a year if they're lucky.
Well, there you go. So, they're only getting paid every couple months, and that therein lies the problem.
Right. So we have to take Craig's question too, because it's so right on time for me, but he wants to know if he can move into his rental property, live there as our main home for 2 years, and then sell it without having to pay capital gains. And I say yes, because if they don't have a primary, they should absolutely be able to do that.
Yes, that is in fact the rule. Now, caveat, which means caution, okay? Because you always give me a hard time for saying lawyer words. Caveat is, I had better see good documentation on the fact that you were actually living in that house. I'd better see your driver's license change. I better see your voter's registration change, utility bills, school records, all that kind of stuff. Make it easy for your lawyer to prove that you aren't doing anything shady. That's kind of the point here.
Right. And back to what he said, he was asking if he could move into the rental property. Right. So if in fact you do.
Okay. But after, 20 plus years of representing clients, okay, there's an underlying question here. Can I get away with it being shady? That was the other part of the question. You can't read because you just don't have that same experience.
I don't do that part of that. I just don't see that part of it.
No, and I'm just kind of kidding here. Most people that come and talk to me are perfectly, fine and wonderful people, but there is always some element of folks who are trying to get over and trying to, get over on the system. And all I'm saying is, even if you're going to try and do that, just make sure you have good documentation. You might get away with it. I don't know, but just have good documentation. The IRS runs on documentation. We know that. So it's about that time. It's that time for the IRS Train Wreck of the Week. This is the segment of the show where we talk about someone who came in and their financial situation, specifically with the IRS, was a train wreck. And this week's example is no different. This gentleman has been really a pleasure to work with. I've been working with him, I think, off and on, pretty much all the way on, for almost 4 years. He was a non-filer, and he hadn't filed a tax return since the early 2000s. I do recall that. He was a real estate investor, and he was a flipper. And you know what a flipper is. A flipper is somebody who buys kind of junky houses, and they, not necessarily always junky houses, but this guy's business model was... They buy
them for cheap, fix them up, make a profit.
Yeah, he would buy junky houses, he'd fix them up and flip them and make a profit. And the problem with that is you need lots of documentation, right? Because if you're going to fix them, you're going to have lots of expenses. And if you don't file a tax return, what's going to happen is the IRS is just going to take the gross proceeds of the sale, go ahead and multiply that by the tax rate, and that equals your tax bill. And that's what happened for this gentleman in one of these tax years. He ended up owing about $250,350 after we filed everything. But one of the years was actually a substitute for return, like I just alluded to, where the IRS just added up all the revenue and multiplied by the tax rate. And they came out with a tax bill of just short of $80,000. And when he heard that number, he was incensed. He was like freaking out. He was so upset about it. He's like, I didn't make any money that year. That was the year of the 123 Main Street house or whatever, And he's like, that house just about killed me. So we filed an original return in that particular year, and we got that $80,000 bill knocked down to about $250. So that was a really pretty big deal for him. And I think there was one or two other years that were like that, where we filed original returns. There was at least one other where we knocked it from this big number down to this more reasonable number. And then what happened is he still owed a fair amount of money, more than $100,000 to the IRS. And he sold one of these houses. Like one of the houses got ready to sell. The market was right and everything. And there was a tax lien attached. And when he sold that house, a bunch of the taxes got paid. And he was fine with that in this particular scenario. And so just recently he still owed about $50,000 or a little bit less. And we got him into an installment agreement that was pretty simple. And for the first time in this guy's, the last 10, 15 years, he's actually current with the IRS. He has an installment agreement. He has a plan. He doesn't have to worry about the IRS anymore. He just has to worry about making that payment he can afford. He can actually pay this thing off right now if he wanted to, but he wants the cash more than he wants, it to be paid off.
It makes me cringe thinking about how, just buying properties and doing this stuff and not being prepared.
Yeah.
Like it just makes me cringe.
Yeah. He and I have had extensive conversations about having documentation and keeping good records and whatnot now, because it's really important, especially in that business, that you have really good records. Those Home Depot receipts, those things fade.
Those thermal ones. Yeah.
You better have those things photocopied so that you can prove those things up. Because if you think you're going to leave them in the pickup truck and you're going to, for a year and you're going to be able to read them, you got another thing coming.
And they do email them all now. So do it. Shoebox. All right.
For sure.
We're out of time. It was fun talking about 11 ways to get out of debt.
Yeah, we had a good time today. It was a little bit different show, but I had a good time.
Thanks for joining us for the IRS Solution Attorney Show. You can catch Darrin at the IRSSolutionAttorney.com, right? And you have another one, Get IRS Help?
GetIRSHelp.com is the main site.
A little easier.
Yep.
And you can get them at 888-GET-MISH.
Website, GetIRSHelp.com.